The breakdown in the city. The morning sun rose over the tall glass towers of downtown, pouring golden light across busy streets already filled with the rush of cars and buses. Engines rumbled, horns blared, people hurried across crosswalks clutching coffee cups and briefcases as though the world would collapse if they slowed even for a moment. Inside one of the intersections, a black luxury SUV rolled forward, gleaming under the sun. Its driver, Ella Morgan, tightened her grip on the steering wheel as her car began to shudder. She was 33, a woman whose sharp business suits and perfectly polished shoes made her look like she belonged in command of every room she walked into. Yet that morning, no amount of success could hide the sweat gathering at her hairline. Her eyes flicked nervously to the glowing dashboard. The engine temperature needle had buried itself in the red. Warning lights flashed like angry eyes. No, 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 Ella muttered. She tapped the wheel with the flat of her palm. Why now? Why today of all days? The car gave a deep cough, shook like it was gasping for its last breath, and then silence. The SUV stalled right in the middle of the intersection. Instantly, horns erupted from behind. A delivery driver stuck his head out the window and shouted, "Move it, lady!" A cyclist swerved around her hood, cursing as he passed. Ella leaned her forehead against the steering wheel. She was already late for the most important board meeting of her career. She had spent weeks preparing the presentation that might save her company's future, and now her car, her expensive, supposedly reliable Range Rover, had chosen this exact morning to betray her. "Mommy?" The soft voice from the back seat made Ella turn quickly. Her 6-year-old daughter, Lily, sat hugging a stuffed bunny so tightly it looked like she was trying to squeeze courage out of it. Her wubby-yabby eyed brown eyes shimmered with fear. Are we going to be late?" Lily asked. Ella forced a smile, though her heart was pounding. "I'm trying, baby. Just stay calm." She picked up her phone with shaking hands. No signal, of course. Her office was 3 miles away and she had no time to wait for a tow truck. Her breath grew shallow. For a moment, panic wrapped its fingers around her throat. Then, from the corner of her vision, she saw someone slowing down. A man riding an old bicycle coasted toward the broken SUV. He wore a faded gray t-shirt and jeans stained with grease. His shoes were scuffed, his dark hair slightly messy, but his shoulders carried a quiet strength. He stopped, set his bike against a lamppost, and walked calmly to the driver's side window. "You all right?" he asked in a steady voice. Ella's eyes narrowed. She didn't like strangers approaching, especially when she had her daughter in the back. "I'm fine," she said quickly, trying to wave him off. "It just overheated. I'll call someone." The man glanced at the line of furious drivers stuck behind her, then back at her flushed face. "You'll block traffic for half the morning waiting for a tow. Pop the hood, I'll take a look." Ella frowned. "Do I look like the kind of woman who lets strangers touch her car?" The man didn't flinch. "Do you look like the kind of woman who knows how to fix one?" Her lips parted, ready to snap back, but then she shut them. He was right. She didn't have a clue. And something in his calm expression made her hesitate. From the back seat, Lily whispered, "Mommy, maybe he can help." Ella sighed, unlocked the hood, and leaned back in her seat. "Fine, but if you break anything, you're paying for it." The man gave a small half-smile like he'd heard that 100 times before. He walked to the front, lifted the hood, and disappeared inside a cloud of steam. Inside the SUV, Ella watched him through the windshield, her arms crossed tightly. She couldn't deny there was something unusual about him. He didn't look hurried, didn't look annoyed, didn't even look like he cared about the angry drivers swerving past. He simply moved with quiet confidence, as though engines spoke to him in a language only he understood. "Who is he, Mommy?" Lily whispered. "Just some man," Ella muttered. 10 minutes later, the man closed the hood and wiped his hands on a rag pulled from his back pocket. He walked back to her window. "You blew a hose," he explained. "I patched it for now, but you'll need a replacement. Don't drive too far until it's fixed." Ella blinked. "That's it? You fixed it?" "Yeah. Should start fine now." Ella reached for her purse. How much do I owe you? The man shook his head. Nothing, just be careful. She stared at him like he had just spoken another language. Nothing? Do you realize I could have called roadside assistance and paid hundreds of dollars? Then you're lucky I came by, he said simply. Her pride fought to form another argument, but before she could, a tiny voice from the back seat made both adults freeze. Mommy, Lily whispered, clutching her bunny tighter. She leaned close to Ella's ear, though her words came just loud enough for the man outside to hear. That's him. He's my daddy. Please marry him. Ella's breath caught. Her face burned red. Lily, she hissed, spinning toward her daughter. You don't say things like that. But the man had already heard. For the first time since he arrived, his calm eyes flickered with surprise. He glanced from the little girl to Ella, then back again. Slowly, his lips curved into a faint, almost shy smile. Ella wanted the ground to swallow her whole. She quickly started the engine. It roared back to life as if nothing had ever been wrong. Without another word, she gave the man a stiff nod and pulled into traffic, leaving him standing at the curb with his bicycle. But though she drove away, Ella couldn't shake the sound of her daughter's whisper. A whisper that stays. The boardroom of Morgan Enterprises was a glass-walled cage perched high above the city skyline, the kind of place that made people feel both powerful and small at the same time. The sun reflected off the polished table, casting sharp white light across neatly stacked files and gleaming laptops. A dozen executives sat in stiff-backed leather chairs waiting for Ella's arrival with their usual blend of impatience and curiosity. When she finally rushed through the doors, her hair slightly disheveled from the stressful morning and her voice a little too tight, she knew she was late. Whispers rippled across the room, colleagues glancing at their watches, their eyes silently judging her. Yet Ella lifted her chin, smoothed the lapel of her navy blazer, and forced the calm mask she had worn her entire career. No one here needed to know that her car had betrayed her in the middle of an intersection, that her daughter had whispered something that left her heart rattling in its cage, or that a stranger with oil-stained hands had just saved her. She delivered her presentation with precision, her voice clear, her arguments sharp. Charts appeared on the screen, numbers clicked into place, and by the time she finished, a cautious ripple of applause filled the air. To everyone else, it was another successful pitch. But to Ella, something felt different. As she clicked off the projector and gathered her papers, her mind betrayed her, wandering back to the man at the intersection. His steady voice, the easy way he patched the hose without asking for reward, the faint smile when Lily had whispered those dangerous words, "That's him. Please marry him." Ella shook her head, as if trying to clear fog from her mind. It was absurd, a ridiculous moment. Children said foolish things all the time, but the whisper stayed. All throughout the day, while she answered emails, took calls, and signed contracts, it echoed in the background of her thoughts. She tried to push it aside, but it clung to her like perfume after a party, faint, lingering, impossible to wash off. By evening, when she returned to her high-rise apartment, Ella felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down. She unlocked the door and Lily bounded inside, tossing her bunny onto the couch and kicking off her little shoes. The apartment was large, luxurious, filled with sleek furniture and modern art, yet in its silence it always felt too big for just the two of them. "Mommy, can we have pancakes for dinner?" Lily asked, spinning in the middle of the living room. "Pancakes? That's not dinner food," Ella replied, setting her briefcase down. "Daddy used to make pancakes for dinner sometimes," Lily said innocently. Ella froze. The words slipped through her heart like a thin blade. She knelt down and brushed Lily's hair back gently. "Sweetheart, you don't have a daddy." Lily pouted. "Yes, I do. I just met him today." Ella's throat tightened. "That man was just helping us with the car. He's not your father." "But he could be," Lily insisted. "He looked at you like he knew you. And when I saw him, I felt it. He's the one." Ella sighed, holding her daughter close. "Sometimes we feel things because we want them to be true, Lily. But life isn't always like that." Still, when Ella tucked her into bed and kissed her goodnight, she couldn't stop the memory from replaying. The stranger's steady eyes, the warmth in them when he looked at Lily. It unsettled her in ways she didn't want to admit. While Ella wrestled with her thoughts in her high-rise apartment across town, Daniel Carter was tucking his own daughter Sophie into bed in their modest two-bedroom house. The home was far from luxurious. Peel-in, G paint clung to the walls. The carpet was worn thin in places, and the furniture was mismatched, but it pulsed with warmth. Sophie's laughter seemed to fill every corner, and Daniel's steady hands had mended every crack and flaw over the years. "Daddy, did you help a lady today?" Sophie asked as she hugged her teddy bear. Daniel chuckled, sitting at the edge of her bed. "I help lots of people every day. That's what mechanics do." "No, I mean a fancy lady, with shiny hair and a little girl in the car." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "How do you know about that?" "Because I saw you looking different when you came home. Like your eyes were thinking about her." He laughed softly and kissed her forehead. "You're too smart for your own good, kiddo. Go to sleep." But when the lights were out and Sophie's breathing grew steady, Daniel sat at the small kitchen table with a cup of coffee and let his thoughts unravel. She had been different, that woman, not like most of the customers who passed through his shop or the drivers who cursed when stranded on the road. She had been sharp, guarded, almost icy at first, but there was something beneath the surface, a vulnerability that had flickered when her daughter spoke. And the child, her innocent whisper, still rang in his ears. "That's him. Please marry him." Daniel shook his head, smiling at the absurdity. Children said things without filter. He knew better than to read into it. Yet deep down, some part of him, the part that had been lonely for longer than he cared to admit, felt a strange tug. The following week passed in the blur of ordinary life. Ella continued her endless stream of meetings, phone calls, and deadlines. Daniel repaired cars, balanced bills, and helped Sophie with her schoolwork at night. Their worlds, so different in pace and privilege, spun separately. But fate has a way of weaving threads back together when the fabric of destiny demands it. On Saturday morning, Ella took Lily to the community library for a children's reading event. She wanted her daughter to have something other than nannies, screens, and empty penthouse rooms to shape her childhood. The library was crowded with families, children sitting cross-legged on rugs as a volunteer read aloud from a brightly illustrated book. Ella found a seat at the back, crossing her arms as she watched Lily lean forward with eager eyes. Then, halfway through the event, her breath caught. At the far side of the room, standing tall with his arms folded, was the man from the intersection, Daniel. And beside him, perched on a chair with swinging legs, was a little girl with long braids and a teddy bear in her lap. Lily spotted them before Ella could look away. She gasped, scrambled up, and tugged at Ella's sleeve. "Mommy, Mommy, it's him. And my sister." Ella flushed crimson. "Lily, don't." But it was too late. Lily darted across the rug and stood before Daniel's daughter, grinning. "Hi, I'm Lily. What's your name?" The other girl smiled shyly. "Sophie." Daniel's eyes met Ella's across the room. For a long moment, time seemed to slow. Two worlds colliding again by chance, or something greater. Second chance encounters. The library meeting should have been nothing more than coincidence, yet the moment Ella saw Daniel again, a ripple of unease stirred through her chest. She had told herself the incident on the road was finished, nothing more than an inconvenient morning saved by a stranger's kindness. But now here he was, standing a few feet away as if fate had intentionally pulled their paths together. His presence was steady, unassuming, and yet it unsettled her in ways that business rivals and boardroom battles never could. Lily, of course, did not hesitate. With the courage only a child could carry, she tugged Sophie's hand and pulled her toward the ready rug where children were gathered. Sophie's shy smile widened into one of comfort, as if she had been waiting all along for someone like Lily to appear. They sank down together, whispering and giggling between story pages, their laughter a natural bridge between two worlds. Ella watched from her seat, torn between amusement and dread. She had always prided herself on control of her schedule, her company, her life. Yet this was something beyond her grasp. The innocent magnetism of children, the way they disarmed walls adults spent years building. Daniel noticed it too. Standing in the back of the room, his calloused hands resting lightly on the straps of his worn backpack, he observed Sophie's joy with quiet pride. When he glanced across the space and caught Ella's eyes, he didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't speak. But something passed between them nonetheless, a silent acknowledgement that whatever this was, it was not ordinary. He looked away first, his gaze returning to his daughter, but the awareness lingered like a thread stray. After the reading ended, the crowd spilled out into the lobby where tables were set with crayons and coloring sheets. Children swarmed around, and soon Lily and Sophie were bent over a page of castles and dragons, coloring side by side as if they had been friends forever. Ella approached hesitantly, clutching her purse against her side, while Daniel leaned casually against a nearby wall, his presence as solid as a pillar but without the arrogance of someone trying to dominate the space. He was simply there, grounded. "Looks like they get along," he said at last, his tone even but carrying the faintest undercurrent of amusement. Ella straightened her shoulders. "Children are quick to make friends. Sometimes quicker than adults," he replied, shit taught between them. She narrowed her eyes slightly, unsure if that was a challenge or merely an observation. "I suppose you come here often?" "Every Saturday. Sophie loves the story hours. Gives her something to look forward to during the week." "That's admirable," Ella admitted reluctantly. "I try to bring Lily to events like this when my schedule allows." Daniel tilted his head, studying her for a moment. "And how often does your schedule allow?" The bluntness made her bristle. No one spoke to her like that, not in her office, not in her social circle. Yet here was this man with grease under his nails and a soft voice, asking questions she didn't want to answer. "Enough," she said crisply, though deep down she knew the truth was far less flattering. Before he could respond, Lily called out, "Mommy, look, we're sharing colors." Ella forced a smile and stepped closer, kneeling to admire the paper. "That's very nice, sweetheart." She glanced at Sophie, who was carefully shading the dragon's wings. "You're very talented, Sophie." The little girl beamed at the compliment. "Daddy says practice makes everything better." Ella's eyes flickered up to Daniel's, and in that moment she caught something she hadn't expected. Pride, yes, but also love so deep it softened his entire expression. It startled her. She had seen men proud of their companies, their wealth, their accomplishments. But this was different. Pure, simple pride in a child's joy. It was the kind of love money couldn't buy, the kind of love Ella had almost forgotten existed. The girls begged for ice cream after coloring, and against her usual instinct to refuse indulgence, Ella found herself saying yes. To her surprise, Daniel agreed to join, and soon the four of them were seated at a corner table in a small shop across the street. The girls chatted endlessly, swapping stories about school, toys, and favorite movies, while the adults remained quieter, sipping their coffee and watching. Daniel finally broke the silence. "She's a good kid, your Lily. Confident. Strong." Ella softened despite herself. "She's been through a lot. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for." He nodded thoughtfully. "True, but they also see more than we think. Sometimes they notice things adults choose to ignore." Ella felt her pulse quicken. The memory of Lily's whisper in the car rushed back. "That's him. Please marry him." She looked down quickly, stirring her coffee, though it needed no stirring. "Children imagine all sorts of things," she said briskly. Daniel didn't push further. He simply leaned back, watching his daughter lick chocolate ice cream with delight, his lips curving into that quiet half-smile that seemed both humble and unshakably sure of itself. That night, when Ella tucked Lily into bed, the inevitable question arrived. "Mommy, can Sophie come over to play?" Ella brushed her daughter's hair back gently. "We'll see, sweetheart." "But you like her daddy, right?" Ella froze, her heart pounding in the sudden silence. "Where did you get that idea?" "Because you smiled at him when you thought nobody was looking." Her throat tightened. She kissed Lily's forehead quickly and whispered, "Sleep now." But as she closed the bedroom door, she leaned against the wall, her chest rising and falling too fast. The child had seen through her again. And once more, Ella was reminded that sometimes the smallest voices carried the loudest truths. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel sat on his porch with a notebook, writing down expenses and upcoming bills. The hum of the city surrounded him, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He had told himself not to think about the woman with the expensive car and sharp eyes, but every time Sophie mentioned Lily's name, his heart softened. He had spent years garching himself building a quiet life where nothing could wound him deeper than losing his wife already had. Yet now, against his will, cracks were forming. And in those cracks, something unexpected was beginning to grow. The wall between them. The following weeks unfolded with a rhythm that neither Ella nor Daniel had anticipated. What began as a coincidence at the library slowly evolved into something more regular, almost deliberate, though neither of them would ever admit it aloud. Lily and Sophie had become inseparable, their friendship blooming with a speed that only children seemed capable of. It was as if they had been waiting for each other their entire lives, two puzzle pieces finding a perfect fit. Wherever one girl went, the other begged to follow. Playdates at the park, afternoons at the library, shared ice cream cones in the corner shop. All these moments stitched their laughter into something durable, something neither parent could easily unravel. Ella found herself reluctantly swept into this rhythm. At first she told herself that she allowed Lily to spend time with Sophie simply because it made her daughter happy. Lily's smile after school, her excitement to share stories about Sophie this and Sophie that, was too genuine, too rare to deny. Yet with each passing encounter, Ella felt the quiet pull of something more complicated. She would arrive at the park intending only to drop Lily off and watch from a distance, but she would end up seated on the bench beside Daniel. She would intend to stay for 15 minutes, yet an hour would slip by while they exchanged stories about their daughters, about childhood, about life's strange turns. And always she would leave unsettled, caught between the warmth she felt in his presence and the walls she had spent her entire adult life constructing. Daniel, for his part, was cautious. He had learned long ago that life could change in an instant, that to open your heart too wide was to invite pain that never truly healed. Since losing his wife, his world had been narrowed to two priorities: raising Sophie with dignity and honesty, and keeping their modest life afloat through long days at the repair shop. His days began with grease-stained coveralls and ended with bedtime stories, and he rarely asked for anything beyond that. Yet Ella's presence disturbed this balance. She was not like the neighbors he greeted politely or the customers who rolled their eyes at bills. She carried herself with a force that commanded attention, a woman accustomed to winning battles in places he would never step foot. And still, beneath that armor, he had glimpsed vulnerability, the kind of vulnerability that made him want to reach across the divide between them. But caution anchored him, reminding him of all that could unravel if he stepped wrong. Their differences became most visible one Saturday afternoon at the community fair. The park was alive with color and sound, vendors selling popcorn, children running with balloons, music floating from a makeshift stage where teenagers strummed guitars. Lily and Sophie darted through the crowd, squealing with delight, while Ella and Daniel followed at a measured distance. At one stall, the girls begged to ride the carousel, and Ella, without hesitation, pulled out her credit card to buy unlimited passes. Daniel's hand twitched toward his wallet, then fell back. He had already spent more than he could spare that week on groceries and utilities, and though he could have managed a few tickets, unlimited passes were not in his budget. He forced a smile as Sophie's eyes lit up, though inside he felt the familiar sting of inadequacy. "Was that really necessary?" he asked quietly as Ella handed the passes to the girls, who bounced with joy. Ella lifted her chin. "Why not? They'll remember this day forever. Isn't that worth it?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Maybe, but sometimes teaching kids that happiness doesn't come from endless swipes of a card is worth more." The words hit sharper than he intended, and Ella's eyes flashed. "Are you suggesting I spoil my daughter?" "I'm suggesting there's more to life than what money can buy," Daniel replied evenly. "Sophie and I manage without it." The air between them thickened. For a moment neither spoke, each retreating behind their defenses. Around them, the laughter of children, the music, the chatter of the fair, all of it seemed to fade into a background hum, as if the universe itself held its breath. Ella was the first to break. "I didn't ask for your judgment," she said softly but firmly, her voice carrying that corporate steel that had silenced many a boardroom. I do what I must to give my daughter everything I never had. If that means unlimited passes, so be it. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. Beneath the polished suit and the confidence, there was exhaustion, perhaps even loneliness, but he chose not to press further. He simply nodded once, his silence heavier than any argument. The girls returned minutes later, flushed and laughing, begging for one more ride. Ella smiled and agreed, while Daniel forced cheer into his tone, clapping his hands and urging them to enjoy themselves. But inside he felt the sting of a divide that no carousel ride could bridge. That night, Ella lay awake in her apartment, staring at the ceiling as Lily slept soundly beside her stuffed bunny. Daniel's words gnawed at her. She had built her entire life on the belief that success and security were the only shields against the chaos she had endured growing up. Money was not just currency to her. It was safety, stability, proof that she had escaped the small apartment where bills went unpaid and meals were skipped. And now this man, this mechanic with nothing but grease and grit, dared to suggest that perhaps her fortress of wealth was not enough. It angered her, it frightened her, and most confusingly, it made her wonder if he might be right. Across town, Daniel sat on his porch watching. The night settled over the neighborhood. Sophie had fallen asleep hours ago, her hand curled around the stuffed bear she carried everywhere. Daniel sipped his coffee slowly, letting the bitterness steady him. He thought of Ella's sharp words, of the flash of pride and pain in her eyes. He regretted the bluntness of his tone, but not the truth of his conviction. He had lived long enough to know that love and presence mattered more to a child than any gift. That stability was built not on wealth, but on trust and consistency. Yet he also knew that Ella's world was different from his, and maybe she needed her fortress as much as he needed his garage. The wall between them was not made of bricks or mortar, but of differences in class, in experience, in fear. And yet, behind that wall, both of them felt the faint tug of something undeniable, something they were not ready to name but could not ignore. A test of character. The tension from the fair lingered in the days that followed, like a faint shadow that refused to leave the room. Ella busied herself with work, pouring her energy into meetings and negotiations as if the relentless pace of business could drown out Daniel's words. Yet when she returned home at night, exhausted and restless, she often found Lily chattering about Sophie, about their games, their drawings, their shared dreams of building castles in the sky. Every mention of Sophie inevitably brought Daniel's face back to Ella's mind, and with it, the echo of his conviction. There's more to life than what money can buy. It was infuriating, and yet a part of her could not stop turning those words over and over like stones in her pocket. Meanwhile, Daniel kept to his quiet rhythm. The garage demanded long hours, his body ached from crouching under hoods and lifting heavy parts, and bills seemed to multiply faster than he could pay them. Still, Sophie's joy kept hum. I'm moving. Every time she came home from school with stories about Lily, he felt a strange mix of pride and caution. Pride because Sophie had found a friend whose laughter lit her days. Caution because the bond between the girls inevitably tethered him closer to Ella, a woman whose world seemed too sharp, too fast, and too complicated for his own. He told himself that keeping distance was safest, that letting down his guard could invite chaos. Yet the more he tried to stay anchored, the more fate seemed determined to test him. The test arrived on an evening that began like any other. Ella had agreed, reluctantly, to take Lily and Sophie to a small community play held at the girls' school. The auditorium was crowded with parents, folding chairs creaking under the weight of anticipation. Children in makeshift costumes scampered across the stage, their voices high and nervous, but their enthusiasm infectious. For once, Ella allowed herself to relax, to smile at Lily's shining face under the spotlight, to clap until her hands tingled. Daniel sat 2 rows behind her, his steady gaze on Sophie, his presence quiet but somehow reassuring. It was afterward, as families spilled out into the school parking lot, that chaos erupted. A sudden screech of tires tore through the evening, and a car skidded dangerously close to where children were crossing. Shouts rang out. Parents screamed. In the split second that followed, Ella saw Lily frozen in the path of the car, her small frame illuminated in the headlights. Her breath caught in her throat. She could not move, could not even scream, every muscle locked by terror. But Daniel moved. With a speed born not of thought but instinct, he lunged forward, scooping Lily into his arms and rolling them both out of the way just as the car swerved and came to a screeching halt. The sound of metal scraping asphalt filled the air, followed by stunned silence. Then came the cries, the shocked gasps of parents, the wails of frightened children. Ella's knees buckled and she stumbled forward, her heart hammering so violently she thought her chest might split. When she reached them, Lily was clinging to Daniel's neck, her face buried in his shoulder, trembling but unharmed. Ella fell to her knees beside them, tears spilling freely. She reached for her daughter, her hands shaking, but Lily refused to let go of Daniel, her small arms locked around him with desperate strength. "He saved me, Mommy," she whispered, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Daddy saved me." Daniel's chest rose and fell heavily, his arms still protectively wrapped around Lily, as though he could shield her from the world itself. He glanced up at Ella, his eyes filled not with pride or triumph, but with raw, unguarded fear, the kind that comes when you imagine what could have been lost. For the first time, Ella saw past his calm exterior to the depth of love and courage that lived inside him, and it broke something open within her. The driver, a teenager barely old enough for a license, stammered apologies, his face pale with shock. Parents crowded around, assuring themselves that no one had been hurt. But for Ella, the world had narrowed to a single image, Daniel holding her daughter, Daniel protecting what was most precious to her, Daniel proving in one harrowing instant what no amount of wealth or status could guarantee, safety born of selflessness. Later that night, when Lily was finally asleep in her bed, Ella sat on the couch, staring at the city lights outside her window. Her hands were still trembling, her heart still fragile from the memory of headlights rushing toward her child. She had faced boardroom battles, financial crises, even betrayals from colleagues, but nothing compared to the raw terror of almost losing Lily, and in that moment of helplessness, it had not been her wealth, her intelligence, or her strategies that had saved her daughter. It had been Daniel. Her phone buzzed with messages from colleagues reminding her of the meeting scheduled for the morning, but she ignored them. Instead, her mind replayed every second of Daniel's actions, the way he had thrown himself without hesitation into danger, the way he had held Lily afterward as though she were his own. And then, inevitably, she heard Lily's voice again. "Daddy saved me." The whisper echoed, this time not with childish innocence, but with a truth Ella could no longer deny. Across town, Daniel sat on his porch once more, staring at the stars. Sophie was asleep inside, her teddy bear tucked against her cheek. His body ached from the fall, a bruise already forming along his arm where he had hit the pavement. But the ache inside was deeper, more complicated. He had saved Lily because it was the only choice, because children deserve protection, because in that instant, she had been as much his responsibility as Sophie was. Yet the way Lily clung to him, the way she had whispered "Daddy," shook him. He had spent years carefully protecting Sophie from the idea of a replacement, from the notion that someone could ever fill the space her mother had left behind. And now, fate had thrust him into a role he had not chosen but could not easily reject. He rubbed his forehead, conflicted. Ella's eyes, when she looked at him in the parking lot, grateful, vulnerable, almost broken, haunted him. He had seen plenty of gratitude before. Customers often thanked him for fixing cars in emergencies. But this was different. This was gratitude mixed with something deeper, something fragile, something dangerous. He wasn't sure he was ready to carry that weight, yet a part of him, the part that had leapt without hesitation, knew that whether ready or not, he already had. The days that followed blurred into quiet tension. Ella found herself wanting to reach out to call Daniel to invite him to tea and Sophie for dinner as thanks. But each time she picked up the phone, fear stopped her. She was afraid of what it would mean to acknowledge that she needed him, that her carefully built world of control and independence had cracks only he could fill. Daniel, for his part, avoided unnecessary contact, burying himself in work, though Sophie's endless chatter about Lily kept pulling Ella back into his thoughts. And so the wall between them, already built from pride and difference, now had something new. The weight of a shared moment that had changed everything. A test had come, and in that test, Daniel had proven his character beyond doubt. But proof alone was not enough to bridge the distance. For that, both of them would need to face not only each other, but the fears they had carried for years. Redemption and realization. The near accident left its mark on everyone in ways that words alone could not measure. For days afterward, Ella moved through her routines like someone living in two worlds, the visible one filled with boardrooms, deadlines, and the polished armor of her corporate identity, and the hidden one where the memory of headlights and screeching tires lingered, where the sight of Daniel's arms around her daughter played endlessly in her mind. In meetings, she caught herself drifting, hearing only fragments of financial reports while her thoughts tugged her elsewhere. At night, the silence of her high-rise apartment felt heavier, the expanse of glass and marble no longer a symbol of achievement but of emptiness. Every time she tucked Lily in, she would pause longer than before, smoothing her daughter's hair, listening to her steady breathing, and remembering just how fragile everything truly was. Lily, of course, had no hesitation in voicing what her heart already believed. Nearly every evening she spoke of Daniel and Sophie as if they were already part of their family. "When can Sophie sleep over?" she would ask while coloring at the kitchen table. Or, "Do you think Daniel," she always called him Daniel, though sometimes she slipped and said Daddy, "could teach me how to fix cars like he does?" Ella's answers were always vague, evasive, yet her daughter's persistence wore at the armor she tried to maintain. Children had a way of cutting through adult fears with the blunt clarity of truth. For Daniel, life carried on with its familiar rhythm, yet something had shifted. The garage still smelled of oil and rubber, his hands still ached from long hours of labor, and bills still stacked themselves on the counter. But every so often, as he tightened a bolt or checked an engine, he caught himself seeing Lily's frightened face in the headlights, her small body trembling in his arms. He had saved her, but in that moment she had done something he had not anticipated. She had claimed him, not just as a rescuer, but as something far more profound. Her whisper of "Daddy saved me" had lodged itself in his chest, unsettling the careful order he had built. He told himself he needed to be cautious, that Sophie was his only responsibility, that he could not afford to entangle his life with someone as different from him as Ella. And yet, whenever Sophie chattered about Lily, he found his defenses softening, his thoughts circling back to the woman with sharp eyes and a fragile heart she tried so hard to hide. It was a school project that finally pulled them back together in a way neither could avoid. The assignment was simple: create a family tree. Sophie and Lily, inseparable as always, decided to partner. For hours they sat cross-legged on the floor of the library, crayons and markers scattered around them, sketching branches and leaves. Their voices carried with innocence, yet their words carried weight far beyond their years. "See," Lily said, drawing a stick figure beside her mother, "this is my mommy, and this—" She paused, hesitating only for a heartbeat before sketching Daniel's tall frame next to Ella's. "This is Daddy," Sophie giggled. "That looks just like him. And then my mommy is in heaven, but Daddy says she still watches me, so she's on the tree too." She carefully drew a cloud above, adding a smiling face. "And now we're like one big family." When Ella came to pick Lily up, she froze at the sight of the poster. There, in the innocent strokes of crayon, was a vision she had never allowed herself to imagine. Herself, Lily, Daniel, and Sophie, bound together not by contracts or plans, but by the simplest definition of family. Her throat tightened. She wanted to correct it, to remind Lily that family trees followed biology and history, not imagination. But when she looked at her daughter's shining eyes and at Sophie's hopeful smile, the words refused to come. Instead, she simply gathered the paper gently, folding it as if it were something fragile, and carried it home. That night she stared at it long after Lily had fallen asleep, her heart torn between fear and a yearning she had long denied. Meanwhile, Sophie showed the project to Daniel, proudly explaining how she and Lily had drawn everyone together, Daniel studied it in silence, his chest tightening as he saw his figure beside Ella's. For years he had carefully avoided even the idea of replacing his late wife, fearing it would dishonor her memory or confuse Sophie. But now, seeing his daughter's joy, he realized that children did not carry such fears. They simply reached for love wherever they found it. Sophie had not replaced her mother. She had expanded her circle to include Ella and Lily. And maybe, Daniel thought quietly, maybe love was not about replacing, but about growing. The next Saturday, Ella made a decision that startled even herself. Instead of retreating into the safety of her world, she called Daniel. Her voice was hesitant, almost formal at first, but her words carried an invitation she could no longer deny. "Would you and Sophie like to come over for dinner?" she asked. "As a thank you for everything." There was a pause on the line, long enough that she wondered if he might refuse. Then Daniel's voice came, steady as ever. "All right, we'll come." The dinner was awkward at first. Ella's apartment, with its modern furniture and glass windows overlooking the skyline, felt like foreign territory for Daniel and Sophie. Sophie clutched her teddy bear tightly, her eyes darting around the gleaming surfaces. Daniel stood stiffly by the door, his hands rough and out of place in such polished surroundings. But Lily's enthusiasm quickly broke the tension. She dragged Sophie to her room to show her toys, their laughter echoing down the hall, leaving the adults alone. Ella busied herself in the kitchen, serving pasta she had ordered in rather than cooked, embarrassed by her lack of domesticity. Daniel, after a moment of silence, stepped forward. "You don't have to impress me," he said quietly. She turned, startled. "I wasn't—" He raised an eyebrow, not unkindly. "You were. But you don't have to." For once, Ella had no retort. She set the dishes down, her voice softer than she expected. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to let people in." Daniel's expression softened, the walls between them thinning just a little. "Neither do I," he admitted. "But maybe the girls already figured it out for us." They ate together, the conversation halting at first but growing easier as the evening went on. They spoke of the girls' dreams, of books and school projects, of the small joys that filled their daughters' days. By the time the plates were cleared, the room no longer felt quite so foreign. It felt possible. That night, after Daniel and Sophie had left, Ella stood at the window, looking out at the glittering city. For years, she had believed that redemption would come through success, through proving herself in boardrooms and climbing higher than anyone had expected. But now she began to realize that redemption might mean something else entirely. The courage to embrace love, the humility to admit her own need, and the willingness to let her daughter's innocent whisper lead her toward a life she had never dared imagine. A new beginning. The dinner at Ella's apartment had been a turning point, though neither she nor Daniel fully admitted it aloud. Something subtle shifted that evening, like a locked door left slightly ajar. In the days that followed, their lives continued on separate tracks, Ella navigating her high-stakes corporate world, Daniel keeping his modest garage afloat. But beneath the surface, both carried an unspoken awareness that things were no longer as they once had been. The girls, meanwhile, carried no such hesitation. For them, the boundaries had already dissolved. Sophie spoke of Lily as if she were a sister, while Lily chattered endlessly about Daniel, weaving him into their lives as naturally as if he had always been there. Children, in their innocence, often see the truth long before adults are willing to name it. Yet for Ella, naming it was the hardest part. For so long she had defined herself by her independence, by her refusal to rely on anyone after years of watching her own mother suffer from broken promises and absent support. Love to her had always seemed like a liability, a crack in the armor she had forged so carefully. Even when she lost herself in fleeting relationships, she had kept her walls high, ensuring that no one could reach the vulnerable places she hid. But Daniel had never asked to scale those walls. He simply stood steady on the other side, his presence patient, his actions speaking louder than words. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to realize that perhaps strength was not only about standing alone, it was also about allowing someone to stand beside you. Daniel wrestled with his own doubts. His life had been shaped by loss, and in the years since his wife's passing, he had convinced himself that moving forward meant closing doors. His devotion to Sophie had been his shield and his excuse, a way to justify the fear that starting again might somehow diminish the love he had already known. But watching Sophie's joy with Lily, hearing her laughter echo in a way that reminded him of days long gone, Daniel began to see that love was not a finite resource. It did not vanish when shared. It multiplied. Sophie was not replacing her mother. She was expanding her heart just as Daniel himself might need to do. The thought frightened him, but it also brought a sense of peace he had not felt in years. The true test came one late afternoon when the girls staged a plan that could only have been conceived by children who believed in the simplicity of love. They had been playing in Lily's room, whispering and giggling, when Ella walked in to find them dressed in makeshift costumes, pillowcase veils, ribbons tied around their waists, and flower petals scattered across the floor. "What on earth is this?" Ella asked, startled. "It's a wedding," Lily announced proudly, her eyes shining, "because families should stay together." Sophie nodded vigorously. "We already made the family tree, so now we're making it real." Before Ella could respond, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Daniel standing there holding a small box of spare car parts Lily had accidentally left at the garage during her last visit. His eyes widened when he stepped inside and saw the scene. The girls in their costumes, the petals on the floor, the handwritten sign taped to the wall that read in bold, childish letters, "Please marry her." For a long moment, silence hung in the air. Ella's cheeks burned crimson, torn between exasperation and something far deeper, something trembling in her chest. She wanted to laugh, to scold, to explain it away as childish nonsense. But when she looked at Lily and Sophie, their faces glowing with innocence and hope, the laughter caught in her throat. Instead, she glanced at Daniel, and in his eyes she saw her own turmoil reflected back. Fear, hesitation, but also an undeniable warmth that neither of them could hide any longer. Daniel crouched down, looking at the girls gently. "Marriage is a big thing, you know," he said softly. "It's not something you can just decide with pillowcases and ribbons." "But love is simple," Sophie insisted, her small voice certain. "You love people and you stay with them, that's all." The words pierced through both adults like arrows of truth. Children had no use for complicated excuses. They saw only the essence of things. Ella felt her eyes sting with tears. She realized then that her daughter, in her innocence, understood what she herself had spent years denying, that love was not about perfection or control, but about presence, sacrifice, and trust. That evening, after the girls had finally been persuaded to clean up their wedding, Ella and Daniel found themselves sitting together on the balcony, the city lights flickering below like distant stars. The air between them was heavy with everything unspoken. At last, Ella broke the silence, her voice low and uncertain. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I don't know how to let someone in without feeling like I'm losing control. My whole life has been about building walls, and you keep finding ways through them." Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I don't have all the answers either. I've been afraid for a long time. Afraid that moving on meant leaving behind what I lost. Afraid of failing Sophie. Afraid of hoping again. But maybe what we're both afraid of is exactly what our girls already understand, that love isn't about control, and it isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing to stand together." Ella's breath caught. She looked at him, really looked at him, and in his steady gaze, she saw no judgment, no demand, only quiet truth. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to set down her armor, if only for a moment. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you saved my daughter's life. But more than that, you've given her something I never could on my own, hope, and I think you've given me that too." Daniel's hand reached across the small space between them, rough and calloused from years of work, yet steady and sure. Ella hesitated, then placed her hand in his. The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of everything they had been through. The chance meeting on a city street, the whisper of a child, the laughter of two little girls, the fear of loss, and the courage to begin again. Inside, Lily and Sophie were giggling together, their voices carrying into the night. Their plan had not unfolded the way they imagined, but in their innocence, they had still succeeded. They had shown the adults what their hearts already knew, that sometimes the smallest whispers can change the loudest silences, that sometimes the purest dreams can rebuild the walls we tear down around ourselves. As the evening stretched on, Ella and Daniel sat side by side, hands clasped, neither speaking, both simply allowing the moment to be what it was, a beginning. Not a fairy tale ending written with pillowcases and flower petals, but a real beginning, built on the fragile yet unshakable truth that love, when chosen with courage, could heal the deepest scars. And so, from the chaos of a broken car on a city street, from the whisper of a child in the back seat, from the laughter of two little girls who refused to see limits where adults drew walls, a new family began to form. Not perfect, not polished, but real. A family stitched together not by circumstance, but by choice. A family that proved, in the end, that the simplest whispers can lead to the most extraordinary beginnings.